Hey guys, this is Brett Burns with Prepared Man. Sorry about the late night entry. I'm actually in the headlights of a four-wheeler right now, and I'm coming at you with an entry for In the Bush. I've set up some primitive traps. Now, it's going to take a couple of days for me to get everything going, so some of this will be in daylight, some of this will be in nighttime, but the idea is to build these primitive traps with no store-bought materials, show you how they work, show you the components, set them, and then trigger them. So, the first trap that I built, I actually just got this trap right at the edge of dark tonight, ran out in the woods, grabbed a couple things, and I've set this first trap up. This is the Ojibwa or the Ojibwa bird snare. Now, ideally, this would be a live trap, but if it's not a live trap, at least it's going to secure your food. Now, remember that old saying, live meat doesn't spoil, but this trap is designed to catch birds. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. First, I'm going to show you the trap, and then I'm going to talk to you as we're going through it, kind of the process, my thoughts behind it, and the way the trap's designed. So stick with me. Alright guys, there she is in all her beauty. I apologize for the dark. Like I said, I'm actually set up in the wash of the headlights from a four-wheeler and ATV. This is my Ojibwa bird trap. Now I've got it baited with a little bit of a crunchy frog, and the reason being is birds, specifically scavengers and carrion birds, they love tiny amphibians. They're squishy on the inside, they get a little bit of moisture. That's a good product right there. And a lot of what I'm going to be talking about as we go through this trap is matching this trap to the specific prey that we're trying to catch. Now, you'll notice that this trigger setup is the gravity powered setup for the bird snare. Now, if I have time, which it's already dark, but if I have time, I'm going to set up a spring pole setup for you. I like this setup better, especially for warm weather, when you're going to be getting a lot of those migratory birds and things like that, because when it's hot, your spring pole can actually get hot. It can lose turgor pressure, which is what keeps the rigidity inside plants, and you can lose a lot of that springing action as well from the actual fibers in the wood. And that means that your spring pole develops memory and has less of an action, and it's possible that your snare won't even close. But since we live on the planet Earth, gravity is constant, so our killing action, our kill weight here, this stone is always going to fall. Now, we're going to go in for a couple of close-ups, and I'm going to try to avoid the headlights here, so I'm actually going to make some cuts, and I'll have to get in here. But I would like to point a couple of things out. The In the Bush contest said that I could not use any store-bought items. So what I've used here is some natural cordage. I cut a tulip poplar. I'm going to use this tulip poplar for fire making and things like that. And I've made some cordage from tulip poplar inner bark. I've also made my trigger from the tulip poplar, and I've made my standing post as well from the tulip poplar. The only tools that I used was really, I used a Baco Laplander to cut the stick itself, but I've used my Opinel for all the trap making. This would be a lot easier to do with a dead tree. It would be a lot easier to do with deadfall. But I cut a green tree. I was trying to get it in a hurry. It was the edge of dark when they posted the challenge, and I'm trying to get ahead of the pack, so to speak. So let's zoom in a little bit, and let's take a look at the mechanics of our trap. Okay, once again, like I said, this is the gravity fed. This rock's going to fall, and that's going to close my actual snare. If we look up, we have this piece of cordage, and I fastened it to my actual snare. Now, my snare is a different piece of this same tulip poplar bark. And the reason it's two different pieces is I wanted one piece to be long enough that I could reset it, and I wanted it to be strong enough to actually fasten to my rock. And then I tied it off with just an overhand knot on the other side of my action, my mechanics, which is this hole. I tied it off to this nice, very fine, constricting snare. So, let's get on the other side and see if we can't see the mechanics. Alright, this is what I'm talking about. If you look, I have a trigger stick here. This is my trigger stick. I've cut off any of the legs and stuff off the frog because they do have a tendency to catch my snare. I've tripped this snare a couple of times just to make sure everything's working smoothly, and I would advise you to do that in the wild. When you're working with a trap like this, it's easy to reset. My trigger stick comes in and supports my snare itself, and the snare runs through this hole. Now, I've cut a hole in the top of the stick. Through that inner bark passes and goes to my gravity-fed rock. It's actually bound to another piece of cordage that ties to that rock. But that hole, the only thing keeping this line from passing through right now is the trigger stick itself. And if I zoom in, let's see if we can get real tight here. If I zoom in, you'll see there's a little overhand knot. Now, in most of the literature, this is the knot right there. You can just see it. Most of the literature that you read talks about tying double knots, figure 8 knots, tying in little rocks and stuff like that. But if you're building a finely tuned trap, just one knot in a piece of bark, especially natural cordage, will work, because it's not going to compress as easy, and that trigger stick's actually holding it from passing through. I've sharpened the top of the stick. That keeps birds from landing on top of it. I've kind of moved my bait out a little bit so birds couldn't just land on top and peck on that frog and catch him. Now, a couple things about birds is they're not smart. We know they're not smart, but they are wise in the way of staying alive. They're looking for that easy meal. So we have to make this hard for them to take that off. I've lashed this dead frog. I've tied this dead frog on here with another piece of tulip poplar bark that I split down really fine. And the reason being is I don't want him just swooping down, taking my frog and leaving. I want him to work for it. And in that working action, he's going to remove my trigger stick and he's going to become my dinner. So what we're going to do is we're going to back off a little bit. I'm going to set you back so you can see the trap working, and I'm going to trip this trap for you. Stick with me. Okay, guys. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tap on my trigger stick here. This would just simulate a bird flying by and see my bait. I'm going to trap on my trigger stick here. The rock's going to slide down, tighten the snare, and it's going to hold my bird. A couple of things that I want to talk to you about is when you're building this trap, you don't want this rock to be too heavy. If the rock's too heavy, it's going to tear the bird's feet off. And when it tears that bird's foot off, you know what he's going to do? He's not going to wander around like we do if we get a foot tore off. He's going to fly away and live a happy life. Birds are tough like that. So you want to catch him and hold him. You don't want to pass through the hole with him, because as soon as you pass through on the other side, you pass through in his leg. If that rock touches the ground, there's no more weight on him. He's going to wiggle out and get loose. So we want that happy medium. So I'm going to get Jack the trail dog here out of the way. Jack, move over there, buddy. One. And we're going to trip this trap. So here comes my bird in. Come on, Jack, you're killing me, man. We're going to trip this trap here. Here comes my bird flying in. There's a frog, easy meal. Oh, can't land here, it's too sharp. So I'm going to come out here, peck, peck, peck. Trap's okay. Now, let's stop for a second. We got to get Jack out of here anyway. Let's stop for a second and talk about the reason that this trap doesn't go off instantly. One thing is we're not dealing with a lot of weight. We're just dealing with gravitational weight. But another thing is that bird's going to fly away if he senses something's up. So you want it to tap, tap, tap. Oh, that's okay. It moves a little bit. Okay. Tap, tap, tap. He's still pulling on it. I start pulling on this frog. Pull, pull, pull. Pull, pull, pull. Oh, I've got him. Oh, caught. Now, if you'll notice, this is gone. It's just freestanding. My hand is actually caught in the snare, and that's what you want. Not a lot of weight. He's not going to be able to fly away. This is a bird trap. It's not a raccoon trap or a coyote trap or something like that. It's a bird trap, and that's why this gravitational weight works very well. Now let's set it up with a spring pole and look at the differences there and talk about how it would work. Stick with me. Okay, guys, this is another Ojibwa bird snare. It's the exact same trap, same setup. I've still got my trigger stick with my frog. I've still got my poplar bark, but this time I've eliminated that gravity element. Now, as long as it's a gravity powered trap, we have to worry about a couple of issues. It's hard to tune. If that rock falls too far and hits the ground, there's no more tension on the bird and he's getting away. So we've added this spring pole. This is a tulip poplar pole. I highly recommend leaving just a couple of leaves on it. For one thing, you see and you hear that if you're nearby. You hear the as those leaves catch. So you know if your trap prematurely detonates, or maybe just a bird come that quick. A couple of things to remind you about: this is a fast trap. There's a lot of action in this trap. Now, a lot of people, when they have a trap that's got a lot of action to it, they want to put their bait closer to any knots or any bindings in their snare. The thing about that is the bird's going to notice this. The bird's going to see this spring pole flip up, and he's going to fly away. He's going to fly away. That is his goal, is to fly away and get away. But if you put the bait closer to the back loop of your snare, as I have done here, the bird doesn't have time to react. When that flips up, that snare's already dragging him in. So what I've done is I've moved my frog out here. It's the same trap. I will say this: you can't get hurt setting one of these off. This spring pole could come up and pop me in the eye, and then you're going to have a nice video like when I laid my hand open. So one more thing before I forget, my spring pole is lashed onto my standing pole with tulip poplar bark. Bank line would be far superior, but the challenge dictated that I use no store-bought materials. So let's throw this trap. My bird's going to come in. He's going to land. He's going to land here on the frog. Tap, tap, tap. Gets the frog. Spring pole catches, snares him in. Now, when the spring pole snares him in, you'll see this standing up, but it's not fully extended. A couple of things that I talking about here is my spring pole's not fully extended, so it's still keeping tension on the bird. If it didn't keep tension on the bird, then he's going to fly away. As soon as that loop goes slack, he's going to fly away. So, you'll notice that it springs up, but it's not fully extended. You'll notice it still has this nice arc in it. If it's fully extended, if I let it go all the way up, then the bird's just going to fly away. So the spring pole, it's a lot harder to tune. I've just been working with this stick for a few minutes. It's already developed some memory, but it is a viable option if you don't have any rocks around. Now in the eastern woodlands, you have rocks, I promise you. But this may be a viable option out in the desert or in grasslands or something where you have rocks are less plentiful for that counterweight, for that gravity-powered one. So I'm Brett Burns with Prepared Man. This is the Ojibwa bird trap. I've shown you with a gravity-powered kill, and I've shown you with a spring pole kill. We're going to come back with a few more traps for the In the Bush Final 7 challenge. Stick with me.